My father-in-law called me decoration in Japanese, thinking I understood nothing. Then I answered the client fluently, and the entire table went silent. He was wrong. I understood every word, and I sat there holding a glass of Sapporo perfectly still, while the evening continued as if nothing had happened. Chloe was laughing at something her cousin had said. The Japanese client was nodding politely. Dwight Mercer, my father-in-law, the man who had walked his daughter down the aisle 11 months earlier, watched me with the smile he wore whenever he thought he had gotten away with something. I smiled back. In that candlelit dining room in the gas lamp quarter with light reflecting off the crystal and the smell of Wagyu in the air, I made a decision that would take 4 months to execute and about 30 seconds to deliver. My name is Logan Hartwell. I'm 39 and I've worked in San Diego as a senior international trade consultant for 12 years. I have negotiated contracts in 11 countries, met with executives in Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya, and closed 8-figure deals before dessert arrived. I also speak Japanese. Dwight did not know that. Neither did Chloe, and it became the most expensive assumption either of them ever made. This story did not begin at dinner. It began much earlier, in a house in La Jolla where one man had spent years building something and one woman had spent years learning how to take it. I met Chloe Mercer 3 years earlier at a trade conference in Coronado. She represented her father's company, Mercer Pacific Group, a midsize firm that managed commercial contracts between American retailers and Pacific Rim suppliers. Chloe was 31, polished and sharp in the conference room way that told you she knew the right vocabulary even when she did not always understand the substance. She asked intelligent questions, took careful notes, carried her father's name on her business card, and entered every room with his confidence. I was attracted to her immediately. We dated for 14 months before I proposed on a Saturday afternoon in October at Balboa Park. When I got down on one knee, I meant it. I loved her. That matters because this is not the story of a man who never cared. It is the story of a man whose trust was slowly used against him. Dwight had been a constant presence from the beginning. He was 63, silver-haired, controlled, and carried the authority of a man accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. He had built Mercer Pacific from a small freight brokerage in 1998 into a company with 12 employees and retail contracts along the Pacific coast. I respected what he had built. What I did not fully appreciate was how much he viewed me as a threat. I was successful in his field, and better at parts of it than he was. I was not his employee subordinate or dependent. I was competition, and Dwight treated competition as something to manage until it could be removed. I noticed it and said nothing. Paying attention without reacting is an occupational habit. The first months of our marriage seemed fine. Chloe and I lived in a 2-bedroom condo in Mission Hills with a rooftop terrace facing the ocean. I traveled for work sometimes 2 or 3 weeks each month. Chloe managed our home with the same precision she brought to Mercer Pacific, where she still worked 4 days a week. Early on, I asked whether it made sense for her to continue working for Dwight now that we were married. "It is not just a job," she said. "It is family." I did not push. I know when a conversation is already ended. The first real crack appeared in February, 5 months after our wedding. I had spent 10 days in Osaka finalizing a supply chain agreement for a pharmaceutical client. When I came home, nothing was obviously wrong, but the atmosphere had changed. It felt like entering a room after someone had searched it and replaced everything almost exactly where it belonged. Chloe was warmer than usual, attentive in a way that seemed rehearsed. She cooked dinner, asked unusually detailed questions about Osaka, and laughed at everything I said. I had been in too many negotiations not to recognize when someone was managing me. I smiled, answered her questions, and began watching more carefully. Over the next 6 weeks, small details accumulated. Chloe added a pin to her phone. She began taking evening calls in the guest bathroom, blaming poor reception on the terrace, even though she had never had trouble there. She checked messages beneath the dinner table with her screen angled away from me. Most noticeably, she began asking with casual precision about my travel schedule. It was not the curiosity of a spouse arranging her calendar, it was the interest of someone who wanted to know when the coast would be clear. I gave her the schedule she wanted, then quietly changed one trip. I was supposed to fly to Seattle on a Thursday morning. I left as planned, but returned that night. The condo was empty, which was not unusual. What mattered was the receipt in the recycling bin beneath the kitchen counter. It was from a restaurant in Little Italy, 2 entrees, 1 bottle of wine, time-stamped 8:47 p.m. that Thursday. Chloe had told me she would be eating at her father's house. I placed the receipt in my desk drawer, made a drink, and went to bed. I was not certain of anything. I had a receipt, a new phone password, hidden calls, questions about my travel, and a feeling I had spent 20 years learning not to ignore. That was not proof. It was information, and information needs verification before it becomes something you act on. My father used to say, patience was not passive, it was active waiting. You were not doing nothing, you were allowing the picture to develop. So I let it develop. Dwight called on a Tuesday afternoon in April. I was at my desk on Fifth Avenue reviewing a compliance document when his name appeared on my phone. Logan, he said, in the weighted tone he used when he wanted you to feel he was doing you a favor. I want you at a dinner next Friday. Japanese buyer. His name is Kenji Asakura. He is considering a substantial partnership with Mercer Pacific, and I want him to see that we are a complete operation. Family included. I said I would check my calendar. I already knew I would attend. Mercer Pacific had struggled for most of the previous year. 2 major retail clients had shifted to direct overseas procurement, cutting Dwight's firm out of the margin. From fragments Chloe had repeated before remembering to edit them, I knew Kenji represented the company's biggest opportunity in years. Asakura Trading was a Tokyo-based textiles and consumer goods firm seeking new West Coast distribution relationships. Dwight wanted me there for appearances. A successful son-in-law made the Mercer family look deeper and more capable. In his mind, I was an accessory. I agreed, then spent 2 evenings researching Kenji and his company. Asakura Trading had operated since 1987. It was mid-size, conservative, and known for choosing partners carefully. In the previous decade, it had left 2 American distribution agreements after discovering misrepresentations in its partners' financial disclosures. I remembered that detail. Dinner was at Shoku, an expensive Japanese restaurant on Fifth Avenue in the Gaslamp Quarter. The private room sat behind a sliding shoji screen, understated and elegant. Dwight had chosen well. He understood that Kenji would notice the effort. Chloe was already there. She looked beautiful as she always did when an occasion mattered to her father. Her hair was down, she wore a dark dress, and she carried the focused attentiveness she used at Mercer functions like a uniform. She kissed my cheek and introduced me to Kenji. He was in his 50s, quietly dressed, courteous and composed, like a man who had sat through many negotiations without revealing more than he intended. I greeted him in Japanese inside my head. Out loud, I used only English. There was no reason to reveal anything yet. 6 people sat at the table: Dwight, Chloe, Kenji, his associate Riku, and Dwight's 28-year-old nephew Preston. Riku translated when Kenji preferred Japanese. Preston worked at Mercer Pacific in a role no one had ever clearly explained. He laughed too loudly, and after 2 drinks, sometimes referred to himself in the third person. I had considered him irrelevant from the first time we met. That assessment would prove accurate, though not in the way I expected. The evening began with the usual choreography: polite introductions, comments about San Diego, careful warmth, and questions designed to sound casual. When the conversation turned to Mercer Pacific's operational capacity, Dwight answered with the practiced confidence of a man who had repeated the same pitch for years. He was good at that part. I listened and asked Kenji polite questions about Tokyo through Riku. More importantly, I watched his face, the micro-expressions, the engagement in his eyes, and the moments when he decided whether someone deserved respect. During the second course, I noticed a shift. When Dwight spoke, Kenji remained professionally warm. When Dwight described the history of Mercer Pacific, Kenji nodded with visible respect. But whenever Preston spoke, something tightened in Kenji's expression. I had spent a decade reading rooms across cultural lines. It was the carefully controlled look of a man who had privately concluded that someone was not serious. Kenji would never say it. Dwight was too focused on himself to notice. About 40 minutes into dinner, Kenji leaned toward Riku and spoke quietly in Japanese. He was not whispering. He simply assumed no one else understood. "What does the son-in-law actually do?" he asked. "He has been quiet all evening." The younger man is painful to watch, but this one, I cannot tell whether he is serious or merely decoration. I am not sure, Riku replied. The father-in-law brought him. Perhaps he manages the international side? Find out, Kenji said. I will not sign anything until I understand who I am dealing with. I raised my water glass and took a slow sip. Dwight watched their exchange with the unease of a man hearing a language he did not understand. He asked Riku to redirect Kenji toward Mercer Pacific's West Coast logistics capacity. Riku translated. Kenji gave a polite but empty response. He was losing interest. Then, Dwight made his mistake. He glanced at me, looked back at Riku, and spoke in a casual tone. Ask him to focus on me, not the son-in-law. Logan is here for show. He does not speak a word of Japanese, and he has nothing to do with our Pacific operations. Tell him every decision goes through me. Riku looked uncomfortable and started to answer. I placed my water glass on the table. Then, in calm, natural Japanese, I spoke directly to Kenji. Asakura-san, please forgive the interruption. I have been listening, and I would like to answer your question directly. My name is Logan Hartwell. I am a senior international trade consultant, and I have worked on Pacific Rim import-export contracts for 12 years. I am familiar with the regulatory filing connected to your most recent United States distribution exit. If you would like to discuss a partnership structure designed to protect you from a similar outcome, I would be pleased to do so tonight, or in a separate meeting. The table went silent. Kenji looked at me with the expression of a man who had just realized the meeting had changed in his favor. You speak very well, he said in Japanese. I lived in Osaka for 2 years, I replied. He looked at Riku, then back at me and smiled. Not the measured smile he had worn all evening, but a genuine one. Dwight stared. Chloe went perfectly still. Preston looked between us like someone watching a tennis match in a language he did not understand. I turned to Dwight, keeping my voice even. You were saying something about Pacific operations, I said. Please continue. Dinner lasted another hour, but everything beneath the surface had changed. Kenji directed almost every substantive question to me. He asked about regulatory structures, California port of entry requirements, consumer goods compliance, and the documentation failures that had damaged his previous American partnership. I answered in detail. Riku translated less and less because Kenji no longer needed him. Dwight still participated where he was qualified, but the center of gravity had shifted, and everyone felt it. Outside on Fifth Avenue after dinner, Kenji shook Dwight's hand with the careful warmth of a man who had not yet decided. Then he gave me his personal card. I would like to continue this conversation, he said in Japanese. Are you available Thursday? I will make myself available. Chloe watched us. Dwight's hand had stopped halfway toward his jacket pocket. The drive home was the quietest 14 minutes I had ever spent with another person. Chloe stared through the passenger window until she finally spoke in the precise voice she used when controlling herself. You never told me you spoke Japanese. You never asked. She turned toward me. Logan, Dad is going to... What is he going to do? She did not answer. She faced the window, and I drove the rest of the way in silence. By then, I had understood something for 2 months. Chloe was not simply employed by her father, she functioned as an extension of him. She carried information from our home back to Dwight and served as his observation post inside my life. The phone pin, the private calls, the questions about my travel, and the carefully managed version of our marriage she showed me all suggested that another version existed in conversations where I was absent. The Little Italy receipt had started the process. Everything after it was methodical. Due diligence is as familiar to me as another person's commute. I know the difference between suspicion and evidence, and how to gather information without contaminating it. 3 weeks before the dinner, I had met with Victor, a San Diego business attorney with 15 years of experience. I described what I had observed and said I wanted to understand my options before acting. Victor was cautious, exact, and good at his work. He said I had enough to begin a formal process and confirmed that my financial position before the marriage was clearly documented. I told him I was not ready. What are you waiting for? He asked. The dinner. The following Thursday, I met Kenji and Riku for coffee at the Westgate Hotel. We spoke almost entirely in Japanese. Kenji asked about my approach to international trade compliance, how I vetted overseas partners, and the most common failure points in Pacific Rim distribution agreements. I answered everything and remained transparent. I explained that I held no official role at Mercer Pacific and worked independently. If he chose a partnership with Dwight's firm, I could not participate. If he wanted a separate consulting engagement, I was available. Kenji considered that. Your father-in-law told Riku you were there as decoration, he said. Was he lying, or did he simply not know? A little of both, Kenji nodded. He was not a man who laughed at another person's mistake. He simply recorded it. Will this create complications for you? It already has. I am resolving them. We shook hands. He said he would contact me within 2 weeks. I returned to my office and called Victor. I am ready. The next 4 months were not dramatic. They were precise, because precision is how something like this gets completed properly. On a Monday morning in late June, I served Chloe with divorce papers. She was making coffee in our Mission Hills kitchen when I placed the envelope on the counter. I made no speech. I told her what it was, explained that Victor had been preparing it for 3 months, and advised her to have a lawyer review it. She stared at the envelope, then looked at me like someone who had been playing a long game and had suddenly discovered that the other person had been playing a longer one. Is this because of the dinner? No, this has been building for a while. What are you talking about? For the first time, I told her. I mentioned the Little Italy receipt, the phone security, the hidden calls, the questions about my travel, and the way she functioned as Dwight's extension at his company and in our home. I explained the 2 months I had spent documenting what I saw, my meetings with Victor, and the way her father's attempt to make me invisible had handed me a moment I could never have created myself. Chloe listened. She denied very little. When I finished, she said, "You have no proof that I did anything improper?" Correct. I am not accusing you of anything improper. I am ending the marriage. Victor had prepared carefully. My premarital assets were documented, the condo was in my name alone, a condition that had caused tension when I bought it but on which I had refused to compromise. The process was not theatrical, it was complete. Dwight called twice during the following week. I let both calls go to voicemail. In the second message, his voice carried an edge I had never heard before. It was not quite anger. It sounded like alarm. I called him back. Logan, we need to sit down and discuss what is happening, he began. This is a family matter. I let him finish. Then I said Dwight, the dinner at Shoku was not what you expected, and neither was I. I hope the Asakura partnership works for you. I genuinely do, but I am no longer part of your ecosystem and I will not be again. He fell silent. Kenji called last week, he said. He is not moving forward with Mercer Pacific. I am sorry to hear that. Did you say something to him? I had a business meeting with him. I was honest about what I do and who I am. Whatever conclusions he reached were his. After another silence, Dwight spoke without his usual authority. I underestimated you. Yes, I said. You did. I ended the call and sat at my Fifth Avenue desk looking over the city. At dinner, Dwight had told Riku that I was there for show. In reality, I had entered that restaurant knowing more about Kenji's business history than Dwight had learned during 6 months of pursuit. I had listened, allowed the picture to develop, and spoken when the moment was exactly right. That is not decoration. That is how the long game is played. 6 weeks after the divorce filing, Kenji contacted me. Asakura Trading needed a consultant for its West Coast distribution structure, including regulatory review, compliance partner vetting, customs documentation, and the architecture of the arrangement. He had continued researching independent consultants and returned to our conversation at the Westgate. I accepted. It became the largest single consulting contract I had signed in 4 years. I will not state the amount publicly. I will only say that my accountant sounded genuinely pleased when he called to discuss the financial structure. In July, I moved out of the Mission Hills condo and into a 7th-floor apartment in Little Italy of all places. It had west-facing windows and a view of the bay that changed color several times between sunrise and sunset. I lived alone, worked from Fifth Avenue, traveled and spoke Japanese whenever necessary. Chloe and I had one final conversation in August. I believe she sincerely wanted to know whether I had ever trusted her. I told her I had. What I had not trusted was the arrangement around our marriage, the way Dwight had placed himself inside it from the beginning, and the way she had allowed it because the boundary between her loyalty to him and her loyalty to us had never been resolved. She was quiet for a long time. He told me, "You were not good enough for this family," she finally said. "What did you think of—" She looked at me, and I could tell the honest answer was too complicated for her to say aloud. Perhaps she will understand it someday. That is her work, not mine. I told her I hoped she eventually built something real, and I meant it. I do not wish people harm. I simply do not extend myself into structures that are not sound. People usually focus on the dinner, the Japanese, and the moment the table went silent. I understand why. It is satisfying. But that moment was only the visible surface of something that had been developing for months. Patience is not passivity. Passivity is waiting because you do not know what to do. Patience is waiting because you know what is coming and want everything in position before it arrives. Dwight spent years building Mercer Pacific room by room. Then he made the mistake men like him often make. He assumed that the only people capable of building patiently were men like him. I had spent 12 years building quietly. I had worked in rooms on 4 continents, learned to listen before speaking, and learned to speak when timing gave my words their greatest weight. I had learned to become invisible when visibility served no purpose. The most dangerous thing you can be in a room full of people who underestimate you is prepared. About a month after our contract began, Kenji said something during a meeting. "Your father-in-law introduced you as decoration," he said in Japanese. "Do you think he understood what he was doing?" I considered it. He thought he was managing the room. He was actually arranging the board. Kenji studied me, then answered in the dry manner of a man who had spent his life making careful decisions. Well, he arranged it very well. On a Tuesday morning in late October, I was at my desk with a Japanese regulatory document and a good cup of coffee when my phone lit up with an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The message was from Dale, a commercial real estate broker in Point Loma. He needed a consultant for a Pacific Rim investment structure and had been referred by Kenji Asakura. I called him back that afternoon. My father used to tell me that the quietest man in the room was usually the most dangerous. I once thought he meant it as a warning. Now I understand that he meant it as a compass. I am Logan Hartwell. I am 39. I live in Little Italy with a view of San Diego Bay, a contract with a Tokyo-based company, and a phone that rings more often than it used to. And somewhere in La Jolla, Dwight Mercer is still trying to understand what happened at dinner. He will keep trying. I do not mind.